If you watched AEW in recent months, you might have noticed how many titles there are on the show. And I'm not even talking about titles from CMLL and Ring of Honor and outside promotions like that. No, AEW itself in 2026 has 10 titles. That's a lot of gold, and people are complaining about it, people are defending it, but the question isn't whether AEW can support that many belts because they're just going to do it regardless. It's whether the mid-card titles are still doing what mid-card titles are supposed to do. So today I'm going to be talking about AEW's mid-card title landscape and how we can maybe improve it. But before I get into my somewhat informative, hopefully, rant, let me know in the comments what you think about AEW's title scene. Are there too many titles? Are there not enough titles? That last idea is crazy, but let me know. So let's start with what mid-card titles are really supposed to do. I'm talking the TNT title, the International title, the Continental title, and the National title. Yes, a lot of them sound the same. Throughout wrestling history, a mid-card championship has a very specific job. It's not the top of the mountain, but it's a stepping stone. It's the belt used to elevate talent, test their main event readiness, and create some meaningful stakes for those working outside of the world title picture. Think the classic Intercontinental title in WWE, the United States title in WCW, the Intercontinental and Never Openweight titles in Japan during their respective peak years. When mid-card belts work, they create an identity and a hierarchy. You know where wrestlers sit on the ladder. You know what winning one means and what their new position on the card would be after they win that belt. But that clarity is where AEW's system starts to blur the straps. The current electric boogaloo situation of 4 mid-card titles really traces back to the debut of what was originally called the AEW All-Atlantic Championship, adorned with many flags of countries that are not in the Atlantic Ocean. When AEW first introduced that belt in 2022, the idea actually made a ton of sense to me. It was framed as a travel-heavy, internationally defended title, something that felt very different from the TNT Championship, which at the time had been positioned as a weekly television belt. And with that addition, AEW officially had 2 mid-card belts, which isn't the worst thing, especially with Collision starting a year later in 2023. Eventually, the All-Atlantic title was rebranded as the International Championship, a name that better matched its usage and presentation, I think. So to recap, AEW had 2 mid-card singles belts with 2 different identities, one tied to television, one tied to the international stage that would also be defended on AEW TV and pay-per-views from time to time. Cool, fantastic. On paper, that wasn't a bad idea. Back in 2022, AEW was signing wrestlers like they were on sale, and they had a lot of guys in the back and they needed something to fight for. Another mid-card title sets that up, another prize for wrestlers to fight for, and it gives wrestlers who hold it something to do. The real problem is what came next. Time machine here to 2026, and AEW now has both an international championship and a national championship in circulation. And this is where things get really weird. The international title was caught up in a unification for a bit in 2025 with the Continental title, held by Kazuchika Okada. We'll get to how the Continental title fits into this puzzle later, but basically both titles were combined at All In 2025 to become the unified title. Now, the unified title, which honestly is a pretty cool concept that kind of reminds me of AJPW's Triple Crown, made sure that the international title saw few to no defenses until it was split back up at the end of 2025. Pre-merging, the international title was also defended domestically all the time. Orange Cassidy notably defended it almost every week for a string of months, making it even more like the TNT title than an international title. And the national title, introduced in 2025, meanwhile, was invented to be defended around the world and in different promotions, and well, do the exact same goddamn thing as the international title was supposed to do. So what makes them different? Is one supposed to be more prestigious? Is one meant to be a clear stepping stone to the world title? They both admittedly look nice, even though the national belt is a direct rip from the NWA, but neither of them have a clear distinction from each other. And when titles aren't clearly differentiated, they begin to overlap in function. What I'm getting at here is that AEW's title scene is staring down the barrel of redundancy. If this feels familiar, it's because another major promotion has wrestled with the same issue, New Japan Pro Wrestling. New Japan has long featured an abundance of championships: IWGP Heavyweight, Intercontinental, Never Openweight, US, TV, Global, and more. At times, those belts enhanced depth and flexibility. At other times, they heavily diluted focus. In its final years, the IWGP US belt had little distinction from the IWGP Intercontinental title besides the idea that many gaijin competed for it. They felt as if they were on a similar level. AEW has clearly taken inspiration from New Japan's model. Multiple singles titles representing different philosophies, match styles, and divisions of labor. The key difference there, though, is the match styles. New Japan usually anchors those belts around different weight classes, perhaps, or stylistic expectations of the match, like the Never division. AEW, though, hasn't always done that consistently. If you have an international championship match on the same night as a national championship match, on the same night as a TNT championship match, they're all going to be good matches, but I don't see how at all they're going to be different. Across AEW, the match quality is really good, but it's all the same. Maybe I'll give an exception to the Continental Championship with its 20-minute no interference rule, but everything else feels pretty sameified. To play some devil's advocate, though, there are real advantages to AEW's approach. I said before, more championships mean more wrestlers have something to fight for. It gives the booking team flexibility to rotate challengers, protect their top stars, and avoid overcrowding the world title picture. It also helps with pacing a bit. AEW runs a dense weekly schedule with multiple shows, and mid-card belts provide ready-made stakes for TV matches without relying on non-title main events every week. And those mid-card belts can change on a regular Dynamite. It's happened before. And from a talent management perspective, belts can function as morale tools. Wrestlers feel rewarded for their work, fans see the momentum, and fresh matchups can headline Dynamite or Collision without burning pay-per-view level programs. But the real benefits only work if the titles have completely different identities and divisions, which right now, they don't. The downside here is that prestige is a finite resource in wrestling, especially today. When multiple titles occupy the exact same narrative space, none of them feel especially rare or interesting. Title defenses become interchangeable, championship reigns blur together, wins don't carry the same weight because another belt is shown on screen on another wrestler in the next backstage segment. And this is where AEW's mid-card titles risk undermining each other. Instead of this belt means you're next in line, it becomes this belt means you're one of many. And that distinction is really important. I said I'd get to it, and nowhere is the tension clearer than with the Continental Championship and the Continental Classic Tournament. The Continental Classic is one of AEW's most critically praised ideas, a round-robin tournament inspired directly by New Japan's G1 Climax. It emphasizes wins, losses, endurance, and in-ring storytelling, and it's really fun to watch every year. But once you attach a permanent championship to the tournament, things change. If the Continental Championship is defended outside the Continental Classic, why would a wrestler go through with the tournament to win it, especially if they're a heel? But if it's only defended inside the Continental Classic, it risks feeling invisible for the entire rest of the year. And now, since the Continental title is no longer tied up in the unified title, what's its purpose? The 20-minute match time limit and the no outside interference at least slightly separates it from other belts, but anyone can challenge for it. So instead of a belt, maybe the CC winner could get a world title shot instead of, the fourth mid-card title belt on the show. But it's important I say this clearly. AEW is not the only promotion with a crowded title picture. New Japan does this. WWE has flirted with it a la the Speed Championship and multiple women's mid-card belts even in NXT. But when many promotions carry too many championships without strict identity control, audiences stop instinctively understanding what really matters. Fans, even AEW fans, should not need a spreadsheet to track prestige. It should be openly communicated where each belt sits in the hierarchy and why anyone would want to fight for one over the other, because there has to be a reason. And the solution here isn't necessarily just get rid of the belts, although it is possible, but what I think we need is a clearer purpose for each of them. If the International Championship is about global defenses, then lean into that fully. If the National Championship is about domestic dominance, define it clearly. If the Continental title exists to serve a tournament, protect that tournament ecosystem. Belts should just do different jobs. It shouldn't just be here's a belt, here's a belt, here's a belt. You can fight for any of them, and they're all the same. AEW's greatest strength has always been its audience's willingness to engage deeply. But even that dedicated fan base had some trouble understanding what the unified title even was and how it worked. And I don't blame them. So AEW's mid-card belt situation isn't a crisis, it's really more of a booking problem. They have the audience and the match quality to support multiple championships, sure, but what it needs now is discipline, making sure each belt earns its place and tells a completely different story than the other one. When titles feel special, wins feel meaningful. When wins feel meaningful, stars are made. And that's the part that AEW can't afford to miss on. So what do you think about AEW's mid-card belt situation? Should we just get rid of a couple of them, or should we just really narrow down what each belt is for? Let me know in the comments. Hope you had fun today. Hope you learned something. And until next time, I will see you.
OooOo Chavo!